Okay, we're setting up the scene now for our first plenary session. So this is the start of the conversation that Peter alluded to, really, which we know will flow. And this is right back to basics. Why do we need to rethink growth? Our convener for this session is Professor Mary Murphy, who's a Professor of Sociology at Maynooth. She was appointed to the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. She's currently a member of the Council of State in Ireland, chair of Oxfam Ireland, and a member of EU and global academic and practitioner networks. She's also here with us today. And she will introduce the other speakers in this session. So please give a warm welcome to Professor Mary.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks very much. I now realise I drew the short straw in being the first one to facilitate this because it is quite challenging. First of all, let me say how welcome today is, and I really welcome the inclusive and positive way that Caroline framed the conference earlier on, the capacity of it to join the dots across so many different actors, the breadth and range of who we are in this coming together. And I know people are worried about it being a talk shop, but I really do believe we may be at the start of a new momentum in what this can bring forward in terms of action. So I really want to welcome the conference. A lot of us have been working at the margins for quite a long time in different imaginative ways, I think, in social and economic spaces, political spaces. And it is a time to celebrate that imagination and to bring it together into something that hopefully will grow. For my own part, most of my own work has been around just transition, maybe eco-social policy, sustainable welfare, making sure that inequality and the ecological justice are talked of as the same conjoined issues, with very often with care at the centre. And I think that brings us into welfare institutions more generally, but many of the conference teams, language, education, narratives, indicators, policy, arts, they're all highly relevant. But the purpose of this session is, why do we need to rethink growth? And we're very much talking about the purpose and design of an economy and financial system that is a human construct. It's very, very clear. It's not only that, it's a man-made construct. And I think it needs a feminist reconstruction myself that puts care at the centre of what we're doing. But I think that's very much what we're thinking about in this session, is what kind of new economic approaches do we need to put on the table in relation to trying to imagine a more just and ecologically just future. So many of our participants are online, and one in particular is under time pressure online. So I just want to very quickly introduce the four speakers, and we'll go immediately to the first speaker. I'm going to introduce Professor Julia Steinberger, who's Professor of Societal Challenges of Climate Change in Lausanne University. And she very much looks at the connections between resource use and societal performance, economic activity and human well-being. She'll be followed by Dr. Eloi Laurent, a senior economist at Sciences Po in Paris and a visiting professor at Stanford University. And his work focuses very much on the relationship between well-being and sustainability using a socio-ecological approach. Dr. Seán Fearon will join us in person. He's a research fellow with the Centre for the Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity on the WISE Horizon project, and he's very much looking at the relationship between consumption, time use and well-being. And we hope we will be joined, but we're not totally clear yet. Our last speaker, Dr. Báyò Akómoláfé, will be possibly with us online and responding to the other three speakers. He is here. Good. He's a widely celebrated international speaker, post-humanist thinker, poet, teacher, and author of 2 books, and the founder of the Emergence Network, which is a planet-wide initiative that's seeking to convene communities, very much as we're convened today, in ways to respond to the critical civilizational challenges that we all face. So I'm going to go straight into the speakers because we are under quite an immense time pressure, but I would like to invite you, you got the Mentimeter code number earlier on, to engage, and we will try towards the end to include some Mentimeter questions, and you have the coloured code as well that you can make comments on yourself and put outside, that will go up on the wall that's outside. So Julia, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being there, and thanks for being willing to have us virtually. That's always quite pleasant, because I just traveled last week and I got sick as usual. So there you go. So I want to say a few words just to sort of go into the basics of why we need to rethink growth. And I'm going to be a bit stronger than rethinking growth. I think we need to abandon it altogether as something that we should spend any part of our time and policies pursuing. And I think that there's a few good, very, very good reasons for that. So one of the things is that we know since a while, at least the 70s, but probably earlier, so a good like more than half a century ago, we've known since that time that economic growth is destroying our environment and is destroying, to put it quite briefly, our life support systems, whether we're talking about climate or biodiversity or any of the other planetary boundaries. And this means that growth, we have to understand what we mean by growth. When we're talking about growth, we're generally talking about GDP growth, and GDP growth is a terrible metric for well-being and human prosperity, but it's an excellent measure. And we have to recognize that it is an excellent measure, an excellent statistic for economic activity. And economic activity is always accompanied by a demand in resources. There is no such thing as dematerialized economic activity. We can relatively dematerialize it, but economic activity will always come with a requirement for resources and energy. And it also comes with dynamics of inequality and power in terms of profit accumulation, wealth accumulation, and power accumulation that all basically go together. So this growth in GDP has very negative environmental effects and consequences that are really threatening the continuation of anything that we would call our civilization, our stable ability to exist on this planet within very few decades, and it's terrifying. And the other thing that it's doing is it's really destroying the fabric of our societies in the sense of creating more and more inequality, more and more wealth imbalances. And right now we see very much the effects of this in terms of having, very large power concentrations taking up media space. I'm seeing what's happening in France right now. It's kind of terrifying. And that are really pushing our societies and damaging the ability of our societies to make decisions in multiple ways. Another reason, so maybe just to sort of go against the arguments of those who would say we need to maintain growth, sometimes the argument is made that growth accompanies development, growth accompanies improvements in well-being and prosperity. And this, again, is a result that we've known for a very long time. I was able to reconfirm it in 2020, but honestly, I shouldn't have had to spend time doing that. It's just a very robust result. Economic growth cannot be held responsible for improvements in life expectancy, for instance. So economic growth, as it is generally measured in market exchange rate, international dollars, that's a bit of a technicality, but can only explain something like a third of the improvement in international life expectancy. It is just very, very bad at being able to explain or accompany improvements in well-being. And other things are much better. So I'm part of a project now, the biggest project on post-growth economics, funded by the European Union. So I'm very lucky to be able to have this research running. And one of the early results of a brilliant PhD that will hopefully be published this autumn, but I'll just give you a preview because it's so important, is when we look at international, very high resolution data, we see that the accompanying sort of GDP growth and well-being pretty much all but disappears when we instead focus on need satisfaction. So if instead of reorienting our economies towards profit accumulation, if we orient them towards need satisfaction, so making sure that every single person in our economies has enough food, enough housing, infrastructure access, energy, electricity access, like all the things that they need to live well, health, et cetera, healthcare, et cetera. If we focus on those things, GDP growth just pretty much disappears from the picture. And I think that this is really important because we've been sold this story that first we grow and then we'll get something from it. And we really need to flip that around. If we focus our social priorities on making sure that we'll be okay, we don't need that economic growth, wealth accumulation, inequality, and environmental devastation. We can be absolutely fine at much less resource use, much less economic activity. It's really a question of priorities, and it's really a question of who benefits, the vast majority or a small minority. So I think that's another point I really want to make here. And that we really need to focus on energy and material services, that the services that we get from resource use are the things that really matter. And my final point that I'd like to make here, just to start things off, is that we need to improve democracy. So we need to increase the democratic power of our societies, and we need to start bringing democracy into the economy. We need to start making democratic decisions within the economy. Again, we've been sold this story that economic growth and profit accumulation, wealth accumulation will deliver good things for us. That is just not true. We need to take those decisions ourselves and not leave it to the invisible hand of the market, which turns out to be the iron fist of the billionaire. And we need to have structures that allow us to take those decisions ourselves, for ourselves. This means at every level, in every firm, in every organization, bringing our own decision-making capacity to the fore and being able to prioritize the things that matter for us, that do not necessarily maximize profit, rather than the things that will, benefit Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and company. And I will end things there. Thank you so much for being there. Oh, no, just one more thing. We need, sorry about that. We need to pay real attention to the forces of destruction that are trying to undermine our democracies. If any of you have not yet heard of the Atlas Network and their role in pushing highly unequal, highly democratically damaging neoliberal economic policies into our economies, as well as being one of the main purveyors of climate disinformation, I really think that it's time for all of us to learn a lot more about these actors. They have their own existence in Ireland as well. And I think that this is something that we need to be paying a lot more attention to, is who the forces of destruction are in order to counter them. Thank you so much. That was it.
Thank you, Eloi Laurent, who is...
Yeah, thank you very much. So my name is Eloi Laurent. I'm speaking to you from Paris, which is one of those places where the line of the battlefield is being drawn in terms of defending democracy. I will try to share my screen, and I hope that it will work. And you can see it. Okay, can you see it? Yeah. All right, so I take it as a yes. All right, so what we are trying to do here is what has been done for the last 150 years since John Stuart Mill and his chapter on steady state economy. So what I will try to do here is not recapture the story again, because the problem when you do this is that you are telling the story again and again. It's like, you know, this movie about the Groundhog Day. That is the same day happening each time, and you are trying to tell the same story again and again, that economic growth is basically destroying, you know, the social fabric and the natural world. And so let's try to pick up the story really, you know, in the last 15 years to show that there has been progress, tremendous progress in trying to think about this post-growth world, all right? So of course, we need to abandon economic growth, but now we have the tools for it. If you take the conference that was organized, the first international conference organized on going beyond growth, that was in 2007. Believe it or not, it was organized by the European Commission at the time. And it was called Beyond GDP. And the idea was, well, let's keep this vision of growth alive and just change the indicators and just include more things or less things in GDP, and we'll be fine. And last year, the picture completely changed to what it is really, which is new visions going beyond growth, not just going beyond GDP. And in the European Parliament, 10 times more people gathered than in 2007. And for the first time, you could see academic communities, activists, policymakers coming together and forming really robust post-growth communities. And I think this is the starting point of the conversation now. And we need to start from there, because now we have hundreds and hundreds of papers in the best academic journals making the case for robust post-growth visions. And I think this should be the starting point of this conversation. All right, so you have, and this was on full display last year, 3 post-growth streams. Degrowth, donut economy, and well-being economy, all right? You have tens and tens of top scholars working in those communities, okay, and publishing and having and receiving funds, tens of millions of euros by the European Commission, and trying to understand the world as it is and as it should be for the coming decades. These visions, those three visions, so if you want to start somewhere, start in the Beyond Growth websites and go and listen to the panelists to understand where the debate is, all right? I think that, of course, it doesn't mean that because they exist and now we have those robust communities, everything is written and everything is done. We need to ground those visions in the daily lives of people. That's absolutely fundamental. And this is one of the things that we try to do with Julia in a policy brief that has been published recently about the European Green Deal. If you want to think about the European Green Deal in an effective way, you need to ground the transformation in the daily lives of Europeans, and you also need to embed those visions in institutions. So I think these are the two challenges now: the daily lives of people on the one hand, and the institutions on the other hand. And this is really where we should go. Okay, so this is from beyond GDP to post-growth. Now, from post-growth to sufficiency, I think those schools are converging towards an idea, which is sufficiency. Sufficiency is a very old idea, and this is why I think it has really power and leverage when we think about those post-growth visions. Sufficiency basically is a situation of space in which limited resources are used to satisfy reasoned needs. And this can result in a state that we can define in normative way, in sort of way that we want, as a universal decent living standard compatible with planetary boundaries. So that's a very clear and understandable goal for transforming our economic systems. If you have this goal of sufficiency, then you can have sufficiency policies that are measures that are aimed at ensuring this compatibility, the compatibility between reasoned needs, limited resources, and reasoned needs. And you can use, for instance, consumption and production corridors to make sure that you are within this space, okay? The core message is the following. There is a level of human well-being which is compatible with the biosphere viability, all right? But it entails that some have too little while others have too much. If you want to represent this visually, you can use this representation. There are many representations out there, but the basic idea is that it's not that we are all going to regress toward a point which in French we call sobriété, and of course, which scares people. It's that we are going to converge in a space where we can correct the question of inequality. And this is why in this age of sufficiency, the key articulation is between sustainability on the one hand and social justice on the other, right? And this is one possible way to represent the fact that, and so the question becomes, then what exactly is sufficiency in terms of the essential human needs? And this is my final point. You can move then from sufficiency to essential human needs. So to maybe start things off, we can come up with a definition of what is a well-being economy. A well-being economy is an economy that satisfies essential human needs within planetary boundaries. And the question is then how to define those essential human needs. And the thing that I'm working on right now is to define the well-being economy according to two critical dimensions. The first dimension, I'm really happy that Julia talked about the question of democracy, is the question of cooperation. Why? Because this is the key to human prosperity. Without cooperation, you cannot have human prosperity. That's the distinctability of humankind. That's the distinctability of humankind compared to other species and compared to machines. If you're wondering what type of artificial intelligence system is going to replace you, just know that in isolation, you can be replaced. You cannot be replaced together. There's no replacement for human cooperation. This is the part of human intelligence that cannot be replicated by machines. And so we need to preserve that. And you can define three dimensions of cooperation. The first one is social relations, which is the key to life expectancy and also happiness. The second dimension is social justice. And the third dimension is democracy. And we absolutely need to have this reflection of a well-being economy, which is really protecting democracy. And again, I'm talking to you from France, where we have this debate in a very practical way. And the second dimension of human well-being, which is absolutely essential, is health. Because if cooperation is the distinct ability of humankind, health is the key principle of the interdependence in the biosphere. And again, you have three dimensions of health. One is individual health, psychological, biological. The second is public health. And the third one is ecological health. So all the streams that are connecting human health to the health of ecosystems and the health of non-humans, so via planetary health, One Health, etc. And with those two dimensions and those six key aspects, I think you can capture essential human needs. And so the question is, if the question is, what is a well-being economy? The answer is an economy that fosters and protects cooperation and health in all these dimensions. I want to end with, so just to tell you that, again, it's not, I don't think the question is, should we rethink growth? The question, of course, we should abandon growth, but we already have alternative visions that are robust. And the question is, what kind of policies can be put in place so that we effectively replace DGP and growth by those visions? I will end with the fact that we absolutely need to define and protect a robust vision of well-being in our world of shocks. It's very clear in the last 4 years that the world is being destabilized by huge shocks. And the question is to protect the foundation of social contract from those shocks. And this is why we urgently need to settle on a vision of human well-being and protect it from those shocks. Otherwise, those shocks are going basically to destroy everything we care about. Thank you very much.
Good man. All right, folks, thank you. And thanks to my colleagues for laying out the sort of broad strokes, reasons for degrowth, beyond growth. I will be getting into the sort of the Irish case specifically. So I'm an ecological economist at the Centre for the Understanding of slides will come up there. Good man. At CUSP in the University of Surrey. As I say, I'll be going through in the Irish case the sort of ecological, socio-economic, and latterly the political reasons, but why we don't just need to move beyond growth, but why we need degrowth. So to put it simply, let's start with the positive headlines. What about the Irish economy? Why do we need degrowth? Because we have broken through our ecological limits at a global scale. And at the Irish level, we have among the worst levels of biodiversity in Europe. Emissions intensity per person is among the worst in Europe. Resource intensity of economic activity and production in the Irish economy is among the worst, you guessed it, in Europe. And market income inequality is among the worst in the overdeveloped world before government intervenes. So these are the reasons we need to move beyond growth as the primary objective and as the central narrative behind our economy and our economic activity. Growth as an end in and of itself, as the organising and driving principle of the Irish economy, is not meeting social need and is ploughed through our local ecosystems and our fair share of planetary boundaries. So the current focus to deal with the planetary crisis at the level of the political class and within the civil service and so on, and many of you will be familiar with this, is green growth. And that is essentially, we can reduce carbon and, in Ireland, methane intensity of production at a rate that is sufficient to allow us to continue to grow and also tackle the climate crisis and not get into the thorny issue of class and redistribution. More growth for everybody, we don't have to worry about tax redistribution and so on. This is classic green growth hubris and indeed delusion. There is no evidence, none, that this scale and rate of decoupling is happening. Decoupling is the split between emissions going down and growth going up, that green growths like to propagate, that it is happening or that it will happen. And this is in the context of Ireland, which has exceeded 6 of 7 planetary boundaries modelled by the University of Leeds a number of years ago. So let's debunk this green myth, which is popular on the right and on the left to large degrees, with a quote from Matthias Smelger. So there is evidence that there is some forms of decoupling, but what we actually need is decoupling of all key sustainability indicators. So that's one, not just carbon. That involves biodiversity loss, land use, resource consumption, and so on. It needs to be global and not local. So we can't farm our responsibilities out to the global south for dirty production. It must be absolute and not relative. It must be permanent and not temporary. It must be strong enough to achieve agreed sustainability targets, and it also must take global equity considerations into account. This is not happening. And as Julie has pointed out, while there is some evidence of insufficient emissions decoupling happening, there is no such thing in economic and in human history as non-metabolic growth. That is, growth detached completely from resource and land use. So, should we not attempt to meet basic needs as a right for all on this island with the limited and now declining ecological envelope that we have? We are at full economic capacity, you will often hear, in the Republic of Ireland, certainly. And yet we still have serious social shortage, and of this there is no doubt. Specifically, Ireland's growth model is generating, and is all in part, and is also failing to address this social shortage. As an open market economy heavily reliant on foreign capital flows for growth, these flows are driving, I forgot all about my slides, we'll come back to those. These flows are, you don't care about this one, that looks very boring, the other one's a bit of crack. These flows are driving up the prices of essential resources that we require to meet our basic needs. Growth in Ireland is dominated by FDI sectors, professional services, ICT, high-tech and high-value added manufacturing, for example. But this leads to more reinvestment of unessential production, taking us further from ecological limits. And this is, in picture form, what that economy might look like. GDP in Ireland, of course, is absolutely massive. And this is a massive 5 umbrellas of production, or what economists like to call 2.5 umbrellas per capita. We must prioritise resources based on need rather than what US shareholders want. It is also a highly geographically imbalanced growth model. Dublin suffers from the effects of overdevelopment while suffering social shortage, and the north and west of our island, where I'm from, suffers from underprovision and rates of productivity growth that pale in comparison to the pale. Income inequality is also rising, according to the survey for income and living standards, particularly driven by the sectoral income disparity which exists between, again in part there are other causes, the indigenous and multinational sectors which dominate growth in the Irish growth model. The government like to promote the fact that the redistributive effects of the welfare system, again we hear this often, are very powerful, but the reliance on FDI-led growth has produced a fiscal reliance, a growth dependency is the term that ecological economists will use, on which these transfers depend. If there wasn't such heavy intervention from the state, inequality would be much higher from Ireland, and yet 10% of the total tax take of the state is paid by 10 companies. If there is in any way disinvestment as a change to the global corporate tax environment, for example, we have a major issue when it comes to inequality. This is a fundamental flaw at the heart of the Irish growth model. So here, degrowth and the concept of sufficiency is important again. We might more efficiently achieve just social outcomes instead of the inequality that this model creates, with the provision of basic services as a universal right. In short, a new model is needed. Our objective, a well-being economy focused on the qualitative growth of human happiness, fulfillment, the strength of our communities, and the satisfaction of need. In short, a good life for all within planetary boundaries. And just to close, because we're just back from, and there was a few people in the room, are at the Pontevedra conference for the European Society of Ecological Economics and Degrowth. Many people were there from countries across Europe where the far right is surging. And that was, I think, until recently in Ireland, maybe a quiet, sort of uncomfortable reality that we didn't have to deal with. But the sounds of goose steps, I think, are becoming increasingly familiar on our streets. Across Europe, the left has been in a tailspin, and in many cases has been routed by fascists on the far right. They have, I think, the left have lacked a central node of political values, a value system around which objectives and principles can revolve. In Ireland, the left is either fractured, unconcerned with ecological realities, such as the limits to growth because they are uncomfortable, and in the case of the mainstream, ceded ground to the dehumanising myths of the far right and of immigration. Degrowth, sufficiency, and the politics of limits with public abundance can be this central node. First, in guaranteeing a basic minimum of living standard for all as a right, but also a maximum that forces us to engage with the politics of redistribution of income and the assets that produce inequality, and of course of class. And so I will leave you with that thought, and we get on with the conference. Thank you very much.
Okay, we only have 10 minutes left, and I do want to, I'm going to be brave here and just give a chance to people to turn to each other in the audience and just take 1 minute to get anything out of your system, like your gut reaction to what you just heard, because it's been so rich. I really want to give you a chance to talk to each other, and I want to give Báyò a chance to take a deep breath, because then I'm going to ask him to come in as the responder. So 1 minute, talk, Mentimeter, fill in your chart, go. Báyò. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I know. I'll tell you, I give him 6. Yeah. Báyò, I don't know if you can hear me. Good appetite for talking, anyway, isn't there? Yeah. Yeah. No, it's good. Yeah, just yeah. Seán, come back.
You're going to have your three
people. Just Báyò and then the 3 people, yeah. Okay, I'm told the minute is up. The problem with giving people a minute to talk is shutting them up then. But clearly there's an appetite for talking, but I will ask you to come back in because we only have 8 minutes left for this session. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to, people are trying to use Mentimeter now, so some questions may come through towards the end of the session, but for now I want to open the floor to Báyò, who's going to give a very quick response to the really stimulating. Thank you, Báyò. I don't envy your task, but good luck. Báyò, we only have about 6 minutes for this response, so just I will need to remind you that at some stage.
Yes. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. And I want to give thanks to my siblings, Julia and Eloi. And I didn't catch my brother's name, but I give thanks to all of you. This would be easy, relatively easy. I've never played the role of a keynote listener before. I should just come here and say, I agree. This is all great. But usually the world views and cosmovisions and ideologies and philosophies that guide my path in this world lead me to complexify issues. So I want to diffractively read some of these ideas together with some thoughts that I have as briefly as I can. I'm not usually good at being brief. Ask my wife. I didn't just say I do at our wedding. I broke into poem and song. So I'm going to do my very best to respond as briefly as I can. So some of the issues emerging from these conversations might be, I don't want to say reduced, but maybe carried by the sentiment, growth is a human construct. I think we all agree on that, and we should abandon it. I have a question, though, to this, and this is not meant as critique. This is not meant as disagreement or agreement. I think entanglement is too complex for agreement. This is meant to hold space for what it wants to do, what those sentiments, what those propositions are meant to do or want to do in the world. And so my question is, who is we, though? We should abandon it, but who is we? I do sense that there is a lingering anthropocentrism in some of our ideas about how we approach growth, which would lead me back to the first proposition that growth is a human construct. I want to offer a sideways proposition that it might not be a human construct after all. It might be a post-human construct. And by that, I mean to say that we often suppose that these larger than life hyper-territorial constructs and territories and structures are made by humans. And all we need to do is turn it off with the right concept or the right conference or the right gathering or the right philosophical or philanthropic gesture. But we've been at this for a long time. And as a subject of the global South, I think we come with these questions about who is responsible for this? Where does agency lie? Whose job is it to turn off these systems, to turn off these deleterious, poisonous, toxic realities? Is it left to the economists or to nation states or to civic movements or to activists or to philanthropists? Who has agency here? A brief story from Desmond Tutu. Desmond Tutu tells the story about, I'm sure you know Desmond Tutu. Desmond Tutu tells the story about two monks walking down a river, and they're having a pleasant conversation. And then by and by, they hear someone screaming for help in the river. One of the monks jumps into the river, drags this person out, resuscitates him, and they continue on their merry way, just remarking about the incident that just happened. When by and by they hear another voice calling for help, and then they jump in again, drag the person out, and this happens 6 times, believe me, 6 more times. They just keep on dragging persons out. On the 7th time or the 8th time, I can't remember which one, instead of jumping in to find this person that's calling for help, drowning, the monk that has been doing all the work runs upstream. And he says, his companion calls out to him and says, "Why are you running upstream? You know that I cannot swim and you need to save this person right now." And that monk calls back out and says, "Well, I'm going to catch them where they fall. I'm going to save them where they're falling in to the river." My work has been about looking at larger patterns because of the deeply humanist, or like I've said, anthropocentric assumptions about how change happens. For instance, I've been having conversations with the fashion industry. I'm not very fashionable as an individual, but I've been having conversations about their attempts at sustainability. And they're trying to reduce growth. They're trying to address the practical effects and toxic effects of their industry on the world, on ecologies around the world. And so they're going into a lot of sustainability measures, reducing this and exporting that. But the thing is, a lot of what passes under the headline of sustainability and degrowth actually has harmful effects on the global South. For instance, 15 million pieces of clothing that is, tucked away under the, with a gesture of sustainable measures, tucked away is actually exported to Ghana. Ghana receives 15 million pieces of clothing from Scotland, from Ireland, from the UK in general, from the
I have to give you that time warning that I mentioned earlier on.
Indeed. I'll be wrapping up right now. And Ghana receives this and deposits 70% of that in its ocean, in its seas, in its rivers, in communities around, illegally dumped, right? A lot of what passes as good or as healing or as care or as an approach to degrowth actually has the underbellies, the shadows that we in the global South feel. So I wonder again, my question isn't a solution. It's not a resolution. It's an attempt to complexify and to introduce what Achille Mbembe calls a necropolitics, right? And what passes as degrowth often leads to harmful effects. And the question needs to be stayed with. Whose agency are we speaking about here? And how do we come to spaces of humility, noticing that it has never been within our full control, the way that the world turns, and that we need a way of hacking or going into the cracks of how we sense the world so that new possibilities and new futures can meet us. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Báyò, you taught us all how to be a keynote respondent. Well done. And thank you so much for bringing in the Global South, because that was the first question that I have, and we don't have time for questions. But I suppose I would like to give a chance to the other three speakers just on the issue of Global South. Is there anything that you've heard there or anything that you want to reflect back? Yeah, Seán, do you want to kick in first and then we'll go to Julian?
Yeah, hear me okay? Yeah, I think it's absolutely crucial, because degrowth is a paradigm and post-growth is a paradigm for the global north. There is serious growth of essential services and so on that need to take place in the global south. And I think Ireland, as a post-colonial state, as an economy which is structured not dissimilar from a lot of other post-colonial states, okay, smaller in size, should also be learning from that. We are still a member of the semi-periphery. Huge parts of our island are underdeveloped, and we do rely on multinationals for that growth. So I think that's important. And I also think, and maybe Julie will come on to it, some of the central developments in the post-growth and degrowth fields will be looking at this question of if and when, hopefully when, the global north degrows to bring ourselves within planetary boundaries. Well, what happens to the global south, who are dependent to a large extent on exports to our over-consuming economies? And how does the global south reorient in a south-south relationship and that kind of thing? So these are central questions. It's very difficult, and I'm not entirely sure we have all the answers now, but yeah, I think Ireland also has a unique place in that discussion.
But really important questions. Julia or Eloi, would you like to come in? Maybe Julia first.
Thanks. Thanks so much for these comments. Sorry we don't have more time together. I think that I would just like to state that I don't know of any definition of degrowth that includes dumping on global south countries. So degrowth is really about reducing harmful overproduction and overconsumption and really focusing on human needs. And that is something that applies to alternative development pathways or post-development in the global south. And the way we're thinking more and more about how degrowth in the global north and alternative development pathways in the global south, really focusing on delinking harmful exploitation and dumping can work together. That's part of what the Real Project is doing, very much in collaboration with or learning from Global South scholars.
Thanks, Julia. And Eloi, you mentioned that we have the tools to abandon growth as GDP. Do they include tools that are sufficient to meet what Báyò has been raising?
No, it's more than the tools that we have, it's the visions. And I really want to stress that we need to avoid caricatures and really look at what scholars are saying and writing in academic papers and in conferences. Otherwise, we'll be stuck in the Groundhog Day and, building this idea that no one is taking into account the global south, or that, waste is not accounted for in degrowth. All this is just not the reality. I think what I started with is the fact that a good starting point for this conversation is this Beyond Growth conference. So go look at what people are saying and the definitions of degrowth and what they are saying. Degrowth and sustainability, these are two different things. Degrowth, sustainability, and caring, which was all in the same sentence with dumping waste on the global south, these are three different things. So we really need to be, careful about the fact that, again, people have been working for the last 15 years. We now have very robust communities, post-growth visions, and we need to start with the other. If we don't do that, we'll be relitigating this for the next 50 years. Okay, I can tell you, it's really, let's say, really tiresome to do this again and again and again. So degrowth is not about dumping any waste on anyone in the global south. It's not defined like this in the literature by no one working on this. So let's try to, have a conversation, start the conversation with those post-growth visions as they stand, and as robust as they are, and then convince citizens and policymakers. This is hard enough, but let's start with, what people are actually saying.
Okay, thank you. And Báyò, do you want 30
Yes.
seconds?
Yes, I wish we had more time to actually go into a conversation. I have not implied that degrowth means sustainability. I've just offered an example of the practical dimensions and effects of some of these practices on the global south as a whole. There's a reason why there's a defined definition for the African Anthropocene. And the reason these definitions are passing around for the African Anthropocene, for instance, is that some of the ways that we understand care or degrowth around the world often have deleterious effects. And I wish I could offer examples within 30 seconds, but I don't have that time.
But you just used the 30 seconds.
Again, yes.
Sorry, apologies.
But yes.
Yeah, I do wish we all had more time. Like it's been a really challenging, really rich, really strong conversation to start us off. And I would really genuinely like to thank all the speakers for their inputs, and a lot to think about as we move forward into the day. So do write down your thoughts as the day emerges. There's no such thing as a wrong idea or thought, and it will be very rich for us to be able to collect them at the end of the day. So again, thank you for the first session. Thank you to the audience for your participation, and to all the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mary. That's the end of the plenary one. We're going to move on to plenary two. It says break, but we don't really have a break because we're going to have a presentation from another man who uses the arts as a way to express the sort of things that we're mulling over here today. I'd like you, obviously, if you need to have a comfort break, that's fine. We'll be starting again at 3 o'clock. Before that, I'd like to welcome to the stage a poet, Philip McDonough, to give us his thinking or his thoughts on some of what we're dealing with here today. Thank you. Philip.
I've been fortunate enough to publish 5 collections of poetry, and as I look back, I see there's a pattern of encountering nature and being led by that to reflections on social justice. And I have another volume coming out quite soon. So I thought what I'd do is just read 5 poems. The first is set on a lake in India, and it's called A Part of the Ecology. The houseboat's engine stilled, we can believe ourselves a part of the ecology. The water hyacinth our prow will cleave, this fading lamp above the Arabian Sea. There's no technique to manhandle or stow regularly a force that has no force. The clouds, the cormorants, this overflow of raga music from an unseen source. When David played for Saul in the old time, Saul's inability to carry on slowly dissolved. The right pause, a half rhyme, a word well placed, is the criterion or springboard of the new. Can we insist on separated lives when we agree on what is beautiful? The scientist whose job is to control salinity and make the lake life-giving shares an agenda with twosomes on their tiny coracles tossing out lines. This evening raga, blending with bird cries and far temple tethered bells. Now, the second poem is set in a different geography, Lapland, and the poem is called Lapland. When law, backed up by legions, channels the truth, what makes community? When all is leverage and lucre and networked in, can song and psalm break free? Laconic, lappish landscapes of lakes, trees, rock, how is it they display a fantail subtlety, as if a master's touch found every shade in clay. In vastness, abacuses are lost for beads, and mere derivatives of will crash. We shall verify in bog, brook, fell, flower, a handiwork that lives. Now, my third poem is a chorus that I wrote for a play. I translated a very fine Russian play that deserves to be known better. It was the manifesto for a group of writers, Anna Akhmatova, Mandelstam, Nikolai Gumilyov, and the play is about an Irish poet in Viking Iceland. So I translated the whole play, but then I wrote a chorus myself, which I thought was in the spirit of the play. It's about how change happens. At times, the birds act on one whim and migrate. The reindeer armies darken the altogether white tundra, and we humans make our moves at one go, which can turn to an extreme event, a flash flood with panics and drownings. The people who most fear loss are people like us. We've worked hard coding reality. Our main ideas and manageable doubts are like big dams, the ebb and flow of thought no longer decisive in any real sense. At certain times, the barrier to change is like a holdout, some big dam or high wall waiting to crumble. But how we live is mostly a slow creation, using every hand, a source, and then the intricacies of sharing. A river tumbles to the immobile sea. The in-between world of a poem is like the estuary, a muddy, dragging tide. We're right and wrong, both. Without self-hate, we face the deficiency in how we live. The helpful undercurrents are picked up. From phrases, we compose a strong theme. Our music is heard by all. We operate on the disguised frontier between two prayers. Thy kingdom come, and yet thy will be done. To part with dead language for a way of seeing that runs like love before all separate choices is the eternal task. It comes with sorrow, as when Prince Gondola chose love's open sea, the currach of crystal and a green horizon. Big dams, flash floods, the ambiguity of estuaries, the uncovering of sources. Unless there is something of the unexpected in what happens, we won't know where we are. Call it a voyage, call it baptism. And I'm going to read just one more poem, in fact, because I think we have to keep everything moving. And this is a poem about a well-known figure. And I would say to Liam Mweli, if he were still here, that I've tried in the structure, to reflect some of the assonances and rules of Irish language poetry. And this is Casement in Pentonville. Casement cribbed in Pentonville in his narrow cell prepares a last pilgrimage, as if the iron bell of an ancient monastery, finding its way in unbidden, sifts memories, absolves all sin. Something is made manifest, bare to his bare soul. There come crowds of dispossessed, numbered in a roll none had dared dream existed. Mutilated ones whom rubber bosses, twisted discourse and clean guns crushed. The cast-off instruments of distant lifestyles. Amazonian Indians, their barefooted files no match for money reckoning. Out of Ireland last, those hidden, scattered remnants, without king or caste. These poor have no influence and only stand by to share the vigil, whom once your cold, chivalrous eye acknowledged, hating misrule. Comes there then one more, Christ, brooking no ridicule, batters at the door, which is an echo of Yeats, The Ghost of Roger Casement, etc. So.